Welcome back, friends. We transition now to an opportunity both to launch the books that have come out of the IMC conversation over the last year and a bit. And I'm going to invite Dr. Risto Jukko to talk about the book and launch the books. So, Risto.
Thank you, moderator. So, friends and colleagues here in present and online, I have a great pleasure and honor to launch two books that come out of the question of mission and fostering cooperation and unity, and related to the centenary of the International Missionary Council. In fact, these two books go very straight and directly together, because if I show you the covers, you understand what I'm talking about. The upper photo is the 1921 gathering in October in New York State, United States. 61 representatives of mainly and majority Western churches and mission societies. And then you can see in another one we have a little bit more modern version of what is mission and mission networking at the lower photo in this one. And then how mission brings people together, Christians, for witness to Christ, is the Arusha Conference on World Mission and Evangelism photo in 2018. So these are the modern phases of mission. And I think these two books very good way show that where the mission stands at this very moment, or rather where it moves. A couple of words about this Together in the Mission of God, which is the kind of Jubilee volume of the IMC process, in the sense that this was the first idea of celebrating the centenary of the IMC in 2021. And we had in the Commission on World Mission and Evangelism of the World Council of Churches the idea of combining the centenary with the assembly in 2021, which would have taken place, so we thought at that time, at the same time, at this very assembly. Of course, it didn't turn out like this, so that's why we had then this video conference in November 2021, very good cooperation, once again, in the field of mission and unity. This book has 3 parts, and we deliberately wanted to have a look at backwards towards what was the past, what was the impact of, and a little bit what was the history of the International Missionary Council. Then the second part is about the present of mission today, and the third part we are tentatively looking towards the future. And of course a big challenge, but this is an interesting book also in the sense that not only because of the cover, but because of we wanted to show something which was neglected in Edinburgh World Missionary Conference 1910, and Brian Stanley was referring to that in a few minutes ago, question of the participation, or rather not participation, of the Latin America as a continent. And so on purpose, in this book you will find a chapter in Spanish, so that the Latin Americans will no longer feel themselves as abandoned continent, as they have called themselves on several occasions. Otherwise, there's a very, very large spectrum of various topics and thematics. I will not go into detail. Just want to highlight one, which is, for me at least, very exciting. When the author is talking about something like, let me see if I can find the term, when the author is talking about the mission in the age of digitalization and refers to 3 terms, and I hope you understand this all, because I'm not sure by myself: metaverse, metamodernism, and meta-narrative. And so think of that and have reading of the book for your night lecture. This book is the first 100 Years of Mission Cooperation is the first volume of regional reports coming out of the IMC centenary study process, because we were not satisfied to have published just one book about the IMC and the mission. We wanted to make it more extensive. So we had an idea to contact various study centers, study groups. Some were university-based, some are theological seminars and so forth, to hear their voices, what has been the impact of the IMC fostering international missionary cooperation and unity in their respective regions. And so finally, initially we had 16 centers, study centers all over the world in all the, almost all the 8 WCC regions. Finally, we got together in this book 13 reports, and we couldn't get one from the Pacific area. But we think, because there's a quite substantial article from the New Zealand area, we think that, okay, that may somehow cover also the large area of the Pacific. So, this book is also interesting in at least two respects. First one is there's a short introduction. It starts describing shortly the study process of the whole centenary study process. Then there's an extensive chapter on an article about the mission history of the IMC. And then 2 other chapters following. This afternoon we were talking about empires and the ecumenical conversations, and chapter 3 is dealing about the British Empire. From the point of view of IMC, that had an office at the heart of the British Empire in London. They had another office also in New York City. And to balance that British Empire chapter, we have another chapter coming from the outskirts of the British Empire, from India, and to be more precise, from the northeastern part of India, and the impact or the non-impact of the IMC in that region. I leave you to read the chapter so you know which one is the right term. And then comes to 13 regional reports. So if you let me summarize in 2 words these 2 books, I would say, first of all, they show the diversity of mission today. When you're talking about mission, you are talking about a diverse spectrum of things and aspects, witnessing to Christ and being involved in God's mission together in the God's mission of God. And the second observation and remark I would say is that mission is always, it has a dimension of unity. And unity has always a dimension of mission. Something what Brian Stanley was referring to also a few moments ago. I think these 2 books try to describe that, and I think they are pretty good, succeeded in that effort, and more about the IMC study process, I think, in a moment. So I officially launched these books now, and they will be on online PDF version, and there are also a few copies for those who are at this later moment of evening, has the guts to come to listen and see us, what we are doing here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I trust that those of us who will engage it will recognize that it's been a labor of love for those of you who have envisioned and worked hard to make this a reality. I'm going to invite, we have a number of friends who have contributed to the process who are with us, and we have a challenge of time. So we have to be finished at 9 this evening. So what I would like to do is that I'm going to throw a couple of questions out, and you can feel free to respond to any of them. And as you do, if you would introduce yourself and then respond to the questions. So 3 questions I would put to you. One of the questions is, why should we pay attention to the formation of the IMC way back in 1921? Why is that important? A second question is, what have we learned from the study process that has happened? Much of it has happened in regions, and there've been a coming together and sharing that. And then the third question is asked is there a future for a mission corporation? Any one of you can start, and there's a clock in front of us, so if you can go ahead.
Maybe I would just like to respond to the second one, where you talked about what have you found during the process of the study process that we have been...
Can you introduce yourself?
That we have been organizing. First of all, yeah, I'm Marina Ngursangzeli Behera. I belong to the Presbyterian Church of Mizoram in Northeast India. And I am one of the members who have been putting together the study centers and working with them. So what I have picked up from the study process was that there have been a whole lot of cooperation in different parts of the world who have not been named, and the people have not been named, and conferences and the meeting have not been identified and have not been spoken about. It's almost as if there was no cooperation outside the IMC, only when you look at the classical IMC story and cooperation stories. So my interest in this was to bring to the fore the spaces which fall between the gap, the 2 extreme gap. One is the gap where there is poverty, where there is oppression, and there is another side of that, the extreme side, where there is power, the sending. So we often hear about the senders and the receivers, but we do not hear the space in between where there was so much work done, but that somehow becomes invisible because they do not belong to the 2 extreme. So that has been what I find really coming out in the books and in the process that we have been having in the research that have been done.
I also would like to respond to the second question. I'm Gu Jinqing from China Christian Council, and it's really a great honor to be here, and it's a very exciting journey for me as well, together with these very smart people in the last 2 years. And I would like to say something from my own context. Last November in 2021, we had a consultation in Nanjing Theological Seminary, and we invited quite many church leaders and scholars from different universities, as well as the seminary faculty. And over 200 students from Nanjing Seminary also joined that consultation. It was not so easy for that gathering during this COVID situation in China. But anyway, I was so amazed to see the eagerness of those young students when they raised questions, when they took part in the discussions. And I also did a lot of research because I was also contributing some messages in that consultation. So when I read those materials, I found 2 characteristics of our church predecessors who took part in either Edinburgh 1910 or the mission conferences till 1948. That one is that there are strong aspirations for the self-expression and the independence of the church in China, and the other is their vision for a visible unity. Until today, I think such dialogues have not been perished. Such voices have not been perished. Like 2 weeks ago, we also had a consultation about how do we continue, or how do we carry out Chinanization of the church in China, with the idea of transforming the church in China into Church of China. And our attempts have been made in the last few decades, and I think the efforts have not been ceased, and we are still on this pilgrimage to unity and also to make a church that Chinese people would recognize as its own church?
I would like to pick that up and maybe also turn to the first question. I mean, what I found intriguing is, in a way, we have these books in our bookshelves and we believe the history is written. Okay, so we have a history of the IMC, we have a history of the CWME, something like that. But if you then invite people in certain areas, if you think about that topic, cooperation and mission, what would you pick up and study in your time, in your region? And I found that exciting, what the people in the different centers actually choose to study and to bring to the front. And I still think that when we see the individual papers which the centers are going to deliver to us, that the science of mission will develop further in the sense of that we may need to rewrite some of the classical stories about that. And the second part, what I liked very much about the study process is that in a way, this horrible COVID time was a blessing. I mean, all the people were so willing to connect online. And so we didn't have any trouble with travel, with venues, with budgets, and we just could connect around the globe and have this global movement around the world with the study centers, and they were willing to engage. And I think in that sense, I believe that this might even be a model for further study processes or ways of engaging with mission across the frontiers of time and space, because some needed to get up early in the morning and others were not going to bed in order to be present at our session. So thanks to all the centers out there that you have been willing to do that and to come with us this way.
Can you introduce yourself?
Sorry. Michael Biel. I'm working with the Association of Protestant Churches and Mission in Germany, EMW, and I was involved in this process while the organization I represent is the successor of that German organization representing the mission bodies in the IMC.
Thank you, Chair. This is Kenneth Ross, Scottish Presbyterian pastor from Malawi. And to quickly respond to the questions, I think on the first one, the history itself is really important. You'll hear often, and even in this assembly, people speaking of the World Council of Churches beginning in 1948, which of course is accurate, but it didn't come from nowhere in 1948. And those who heard Brian Stanley's lecture earlier, you'll have heard that one of the key streams that fed the movement that created the WCC was in fact the IMC from 1921. So this is a real sweeping historical statement, but had there been no Lake Mohonk in 1921, maybe no Karlsruhe in 2022. So I think knowing where you've come from is an important thing. But more particularly, I think what we learn from the IMC history is that when you ask the questions of mission, it leads you on a path of cooperation and unity. And I think that remains important even in the century in front of us, as much as it was in the century behind us. Coming quickly to the study process, I think what we've learned from it is the value of what I would call polyphonic missiology, that we need to hear many voices. And just to give a couple of examples from the book, as Risto said in the last section of the Together book, we felt we need a future perspective, but we thought we can't do this just with one person to give their analysis or assessment. And so we have one chapter that's not by a single author, but it's by a whole group. And it's someone from Brazil, Peru, Costa Rica, USA, UK, Romania, Kenya, Zambia, India. And they came together and created a chapter that I hope you'll enjoy. And that's a kind of miniature of the polyphonic missiology. The big version is the 100 Years book, which, as Michael's explained, was these centers which on every continent dug deeply into their own context, but they listened to each other deeply and responded to each other. And I think we must not stop with this book. I think it's a model to go forward. And on the last point, yes, there is a future for mission cooperation. And I would go further to say that there is, even more specifically, a future for the gifts that the IMC bequeathed to us. And there are three that I think are really important for the future. One is the IRM, the journal. And I would urge the Commission to continue the publication of the journal, because after 400 issues and more, it's still fulfilling that vision of the science of missions. And for this polyphonic missiology that I'm hoping for, the IRM is an expression of that. And its other key instrument is the World Mission Conference. We've just had the Arusha Conference as a very dynamic event with a great reception, even in many quarters far beyond the WCC constituency, and the Commission itself. Because, of course, Brian very correctly said, as an independent outfit, the IMC only had a 40-year history, but it continued in a different form. And just to give some evidence of its influence today, the Together Towards Life document was the creation of the Commission on World Mission and Evangelism, arguably the standout document of the WCC in this century. So the Commission, I think, still a highly significant role to play, especially in this area of coordinating and taking forward our thinking about the meaning of mission.
Yeah, you and
one of the things that fascinates me and fascinated and has been fascinating me has been the idea of cooperation and collaboration, in the sense that among ourselves we have discovered how we can do things much better when we do it together. And I must say that there's one more member of the steering committee. This is the IMC Study Pro Steering Committee, Dr. Tito Paredes, who couldn't come to the assembly. He's based in Lima, Peru, in Latin America. But not only among ourselves, but also, as Ken was referring, among those study groups and researchers in various regions. So this is something which fascinates me quite a lot as well. So as a methodology of our working was already this idea that we want to do it as extensively as possible beyond for instance, the borders of the membership of the WCC. We wanted to go further than that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that is also a point I would like to highlight if it comes to cooperation in future. I think that one of the things we learned is there is much more happening than we see. So sometimes in the study process, centers discovered what happened on the ground and what is still happening, and that there are new movement, urban movement, there are new rural movements, there are churches who reach out, and I think this question of cooperation raises an very interesting issue, and that is the Council of Mission Organization was turned into a commission of churches discussing mission and affiliated mission bodies. But what is about the cooperation practically among mission-oriented people, and what could be the role of theologians, of study centers, of academics in that? And I think that is one point where I feel the study process brought something to the table, and it would be good to continue that and think about it so that these different levels are brought together. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I would just like to add also that on what Michael has said, that we're not just looking at institutional history of missions and what the church the church has been doing or some mission organization has been doing, but we have been also trying to look at grassroots levels. How have people been cooperating and working together in participating in God's mission? Maybe what they have been doing is not classically termed as mission work, but then they have been participating. So we have been trying to pick up stories of what has been happening in history, even if they have not appeared in the history of the IMC. I think that is one of the highlights for me.
Any final word from anybody? We have 4 minutes. Okay.
We hope to have more books.
Yes. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for whetting our appetites, and hopefully those of us who are present and those of us online will either download or get the book and begin the conversation and think through this whole process of corporation and how we work together, and the gift of this season. I was conscious from Brian's lecture that there was a context out of which the IMC started, and what might our present context invite us to as we continue to reflect and live into God's call. So thank you very much for joining us and being with us, and to folks here on the panel.
Thank you, moderator.
Okay.